Andrew Williamson here. Welcome back to Williamson Education. In our recent lessons, we've been focusing a lot on subject-verb agreement and the relationship between subjects and verbs. Most recently, we've looked at more complex subject-verb agreement involving irregular verbs. In doing so, we've been kind of dancing around another verbs topic that is at least as important as subject-verb agreement. That topic is called verb tense. Verb tense and subject-verb agreement are the two most important topics that have to do with verbs in English language grammar. I'm sure you're eager to know, what in the world is verb tense? It sounds rather difficult, rather tense. And yes, the topic does have many layers. But by studying the etymology of the word tense, or the history of the word, we can understand something fundamental about this important topic. In order to examine the etymology of the word tense, let's do a quick language survey. Now, maybe you come to English from French, in which case you've heard of le temps, time. Maybe you come to English from Spanish, in which case you've heard of el tiempo, time. Or maybe you studied the classics, and you have learned the Latin word tempus, which means, you guessed it, time. All three of these words are related to each other in the history of languages, and they all also form the origin story of the English word tense. You can probably guess where I'm going with this. The word tense refers to time in its most basic sense. So when we refer to verb tense in English, we are referring to the time in which the verb takes place. Broadly speaking, verbs in English can take place in any of three different times: past, present, or future. As we will see in the course of our studies, each one of these broad time categories has different subcategories as well. In other words, past, present, and future all have different varieties of themselves too. But at the outset of your studies, the key thing to know is this. Verb tense in English involves time, and we divide time in the language into three major categories: past, present, future. Depending on your native language, verb tense will feel more or less intuitive to you, will make more or less sense. In one of our earlier lessons, we discussed the fact that some languages do not conjugate verbs as the English language does. Likewise, these languages also do not mark time in the same way that the English language does either. Take Mandarin Chinese, for example. Now, I still speak Mandarin Chinese horrendously badly, but I do know a thing about it. Let's say you wanted to say in Mandarin, I already ate dinner. You would say, 我已经吃了晚饭. The verb in the sentence is 吃, but the verb does not change form at all in spite of being in the past tense. Instead, the speaker of the sentence indicates the past tense nature of the action using the particle le. The verb itself does not tense or change form to indicate past action. For this reason, speakers who come to English from Mandarin Chinese typically find verb tense to be a bit of a difficult topic. If you are a speaker of Mandarin Chinese coming to English, you will want to focus on knowing when to use past tense and when to use present tense verbs. By contrast, if you're coming to English from a Romance language such as French, you will find the notion of verb tense much more intuitive. Your language has plenty of tenses. If you want to say that same sentence that I just mentioned a moment ago, in French, you would say, j'ai déjà mangé. That is verb tense at its best. For this reason, Romance language speakers may find the transition to English to be a bit easier than their peers from Asia. I mention these differences to acknowledge that not all English language learners will find the process of learning English to be equally easy or equally challenging. Also, I want to highlight the fact that verb tense is not a universal feature of languages as a whole. There are other ways of marking time than to change the form of the verb, and these other ways have their own proper logic. If you find verb tense challenging, especially if you are coming to English from Mandarin Chinese, please know that you are not alone. Good language partners will be understanding and empathetic when you inevitably make mistakes. And mistakes you will make. Native English-speaking children are constantly making mistakes in their verb tenses. They have the benefit of lower expectations and empathetic parents who gently correct their English without judgment. Again, do not expect perfection in your verb tenses, at least not right away. I like to conceptualize the verbs in English as occurring along a verb timeline that progresses from left to right, from the past to the present to the future. As time flows from left to right, the verbs in the English language also flow in their tenses along this same axis. No matter how difficult the various tenses in English may become, and they will become difficult, we always have the same basic verb timeline structure to return to. I will keep coming back to it over the course of future lessons. Now the good news is this. You already know a good bit about how to conjugate verbs in certain tenses. For example, we have already learned a lot about how to conjugate English language verbs in the past tense. As you know, past tense verbs are regularly conjugated in English by adding the ed ending to the infinitive base. Other irregular verbs are conjugated in the past tense using a variety of forms that will become clear to you over time. The future tense is much easier than the past. For the future tense, in all cases and for all persons, you follow the exact same rules. First, remove the to from the infinitive form and add the helping verb will to that base. Want to say that you are going to go to the airport later? I will go to the airport in the afternoon. Want to show that you are going to pay the bill when you receive the money? I will pay once I have cashed the check. Will plus infinitive base. It's that simple in the future tense. In ordinary, casual conversation, this way of forming the future tense can actually sound a bit too formal. There's another way of achieving the same goal. This future formation involves using a conjugated form of the verb to go. Let's look at alternatives for each of those two sentences I just mentioned. I will go to the airport this afternoon. Instead, you might say this: I am going to go to the airport this afternoon. Or what about that other sentence? I will pay once I have cashed the check. Instead, you might say, I am going to pay once I have cashed the check. In all cases, to form the future using the verb to go, we use that tense with the conjugated helping verb to be and the present tense going, followed by an infinitive verb. The explanation is a bit complicated, but the future formation will become quite intuitive to you over time. As you practice with this future formation, you may find that it becomes your go-to way of talking about future actions, the one you use most often. As with every subject we have studied to this point, the messages contained in this lesson are just the beginning of a larger discussion. I've tried today to begin exposing you to the fundamentals of verb tense in English, but we will go into greater depth on the different varieties of the past, present, and future in later lessons. Even with these later lessons under your belt, you will probably keep learning more about verb tensing for years or even decades to come. Now, of course, the Spread the Word campaign is designed to speed up your language acquisition, but it's also important to accept that the process will take some time. If you are not yet in a native English-speaking environment, such as the United States or England or Australia, you may want to consider traveling to one in order to practice your new skills. In the course of my life, I have lived and worked on 3 different continents: North America, Asia, and Europe. I have also traveled to 2 others, Africa and South America. There is nothing that quite compares to the thrill of arriving in a foreign land and having to sort yourself out without quite knowing how at first. I strongly encourage you to seek out native English-speaking environments if you have not done so already. Combining that environment with commitment to these lessons will really accelerate your progress. Well, that's all for today. I'm looking forward to seeing you next time for a deeper dive into verb tense. Spread the word.